Wow, guys, so excited you're here. I just want to say thank you for joining us, Dave, for being our guest of honor, Dave Fish, sorry, two Daves, for being our guest of honor on this QuestionPro panel. And so we are just so grateful. I'm going to jump out. Ken?
Thank you, Crystal.
Sorry.
I don't think I'm muted this time either.
Your video disappeared. You scared me. I'm going to jump out and let you guys take over. You have about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and then we're going to do a Q&A that Ken will host, and then we'll do some more surprises.
Terrific. And I'm going to share my screen here. A little bit of information to share. I first want to introduce my panelists here, Dave. And Dave, I think everyone, I don't need to introduce myself. I work for QuestionPro. How about that? And I spend a lot of time in CX. So let's start with Dave G. We'll start there and give yourself a brief 1-minute introduction.
Okay, my name is Dave Girolamo. I've spent the last 23 years in the automotive industry, though I started in human resources. Born and raised in Detroit, still making my home nearby, so all things automotive are in my blood. My first experience was in automotive was with Ford Motor Company as a quality analyst and assembly plant engineering team. Mostly working with warranty and survey data as well as coordinating plant process. I moved along inside the plant to vehicle evaluation, leading internal quality measurement systems and feedback. I then moved along to Mazda, where my responsibility again was quality feedback and concern prioritization for all vehicles sold in North America market, or United States mostly. It was during that time that I designed, from a user's perspective, a product quality survey that quickly became our best information source from the customer. It was better because we used better questions and built processes around the usage of data. I was the very first customer of the company that turned into Impresis, which is now Impresis by QuestionPro. They did all the programming, platform work, and processed the email invitations and survey. So it was a complete team effort and information evolution that led to significant quality improvement. After about 9 years ago, I left Mazda for Impresis by QuestionPro, where most of my work now is in predictive analytics and is consultative in nature, working mostly with data obtained by survey. That's about it.
Thank you, Dave, and we're glad you left Mazda for Impresis, because now you're part of the QuestionPro family. And our guest of the hour, Dave Fish, we're welcoming him. And before he introduces himself, I do want to say that at the end of this, we are giving away copies of his new book. So stick around and we'll tell you how that will work. Dave?
Hey, Ken, good to see you. It's been a little while.
Yeah,
thanks for having me. Just briefly, I've been in automotive for, 25 years or so. Started in banking, moved over to automotive at Toyota Motor North America. And then I kind of kicked around. I was the CMO at Merritt's, now in Moment. I was at JD Power for a while. Worked at a shopper marketing firm here in Bentonville, Arkansas for a little company called Walmart. And then about 4 years ago, I started up Curiosity. So we're a research and insights firm. We do a lot of custom research. And our kind of thing is we try to not just provide insights on problems, but also try to provide solutions for those problems as well. So we have a team of creatives and designers that helps out solving problems. So great to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dave. First, I'll get this out of the way. If you have any questions while we're presenting, please don't hesitate to ask them. I'll be monitoring the questions and passing them over to Dave and Dave, but we'll go ahead and get with our thought starter. I actually ran a poll this morning ran it out there using our instant answers. Tim Cornelius has put this together, and it's terrific in how it works and the functionality. I take it out on Slack, and I left out cable companies because they always seem to top the list. But I'll start with, I threw in car dealerships, banks, hotels, restaurants, and other general retailers. Which industry has the worst service? So just quickly to you two gentlemen, what do you think tops the list?
I don't want to say automotive, but since that's the subject here, I'll say that.
Yeah, man, you took out like cable. They're always bottom of the pack. So it could be, I would say if it's not cable, maybe cell phone provider would be maybe up there, I would think.
The one that surprised me that didn't make it up there was banks was at the bottom of my 5 list. Which surprised me a little bit. I mean, it's not the most compelling case for customer experience when you go into a bank, because chances are you're either doing something you have to do because you have to pay bills, or something went wrong. So next, hotels, restaurants, and believe it or not, Dave, you were right.
Oh.
Car dealerships made the top. Of all things.
Wow.
Yeah, 156 people. Surprise you at all?
It's a high anxiety experience that happens once every 3 to 7 years for many people. So I understand why it's there, but I think Crystal had a few good suggestions: airlines and mortgage companies. But I can understand why it's there. I didn't really expect it to be at the top.
Yeah. I was a little surprised with that, especially because we've been doing some research, and Dave and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on a webinar. CX scores at dealerships are going up. So, we sort of recognize, that with CX scores going up, that's why is it we have that contradictory message of, hey, scores are going up, but it's still one of the most hated experiences from a personal level. So, really what we want to talk about today is the bigger question of how this situation evolves future expectations. And sort of what people do following that bad experience. And it's not, nothing on this chart is surprising. We only let them pick one thing, but notifying management before leaving. It's probably one of those areas where in the car dealership experience, you really don't get that opportunity to notify management because you're talking to them as part of the experience. So, what happens is ultimately is they stop buying, they stop doing business with them. And what we're really seeing is we need to see the change in the dealership experience, on a more permanent level. And I think that's, that goes along 2 lines when we talk about the customer experience. There is the service side of it, and then there's the product side of it. And you can't, they're 2 very distinct issues run separately by separate teams. And obviously the bigger part of that in terms of, the product, you're investing thousands upon thousands of dollars. And as Dave said, there's, only, you only go through this experience once every few years at the earliest, unless, you're Jay Leno and have thousands of cars. When we looked at the consumer spending on automotive, obviously 50% were impacted due to the pandemic negatively. With a delay, I'd love to meet the 10% who accelerated automotive purchases. But again, the perceptions have continued to go down despite scores going up. So, perceptions are not improving. So Dave G, why don't you tell me what your thoughts are on why scores are improving despite all the negative public opinion of this?
Okay, yeah, easy one, right? So, first of all, there have obviously been differences in contact guidelines and protocols due to the pandemic. But overall process is largely the same as the automotive space loves process. So major influences to customer perception scores are timely service, price, and quality of service. So the reduced or better managed traffic has positively impacted at least two of those things. So, and before I continue, every survey is about perception, and I can't stress that enough. So let's imagine that customers are from one of two camps during this last, year or 14 months. The first are those who are not concerned of COVID and intend to live their normal lives with little change. So to that faction of people, the reduced traffic has meant shorter wait times to see a service advisor, less time lost for their vehicles awaiting a repair stall or a service stall, and quicker time to pay for and retrieve the vehicle. So then the second group are those that have been very careful with COVID mitigation. So the most important part of their experience is a low contact event. So many dealerships started retrieving customer vehicles from their homes or wherever they were, though premium brands had already been doing that. And even if the customer drove in themselves, the relief of quick service with little contact left them happy. So it's been a win for both sides of that equation, which reflect positively on the dealership and the OEM. So now with that, keep in mind that a significant change also comes with a change in expectation. So the goalposts will be moved in the future based on what has happened recently, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. So it's always important to stay on the pulse of the customer. So we're definitely looking at a chip shortage now, which affects many, many automakers. And there's also some anxiety about tanker truck driver shortages influencing already rising fuel prices. And those are just two examples. Even as restrictions are being relaxed in the pandemic mitigation. So even as the industry adapts to fit needs, perhaps the simple concept of product availability becomes the number one influencer in 2021 to satisfaction. And that is my major point, that it's always about overall satisfaction, recommendation, and the desire to return that customer for repeat service or sales. So sometimes we're too lost in the details that we forget that is the ultimate goal, whether or not in industry or OEM scoring methods or KPIs reflect it.
And Dave Fish, I had a comment that came in through the chat that says, doesn't surprise me how we buy cars is broken. And that's the exact comment you made to me, I think either yesterday or Sunday. So what are your thoughts on how the perceptions are changing?
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend of mine say, I can go in and buy a new watch for a couple $1,000s and get better treatment than if I buy a new car and more follow-up. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think when we talk about customer experience in the automotive industry, you have to kind of be careful what you're talking about, because at the retail level, things may be increasing. With your experience with the product, that might be going in a different direction. And so there's different facets of customer experience. Obviously, there's a holistic experience that people have with a brand, right? But I think that varies by what you're talking about. As far as the retail experience is concerned, if measures are going a bit up, there might be a couple things going on. The first comes to mind is volume. So COVID has slowed down automotive sales, not so much because of customer demand. Actually, we've seen some increases in demand. It's supply chain, right? So there's not enough availability. And then some of the chip shortage is going to get worse before it gets better. And so we know when there's lower volume in dealers, there's more people floating around with less to do. And so you get, you get quicker service, you get through F&I, you get out the door quicker. So that might be some of the reason that's going on there. But I think overall, if you look to the future of how people want to buy cars, it's been kind of propped up by pretty powerful lobbying groups and interests. Most car dealers, great business people, but they're multimillionaires and they want to hold on to what they have. And so most people want to buy a car the way that you would buy a TV or a computer or anything that's fairly expensive. First of all, they want what they want. Second of all, they usually know more than what the poorly paid salesperson in the dealership knows about the vehicle, and vehicles are getting more and more complicated. Three, they're willing to wait for it. So there's no need to have thousands of vehicles on the lot because same day drive-offs they exist, but unless by and large, people are willing to wait for what they want. And so I think, honestly, I know Tesla, everyone loves to talk about Tesla, how awesome they are, and they have their problems, there's no doubt. But as far as retailing is concerned and the future of automotive retailing, I think that's where we're going to see it heading. It's going to be more of an experience center. There's going to be a sales center. And maybe we're going to get into this later, but there's a lot of other influences in automotive that's going to really, really impact automotive retailing dramatically in the upcoming 10 years or so.
When I think of the experience, I hadn't planned on buying a vehicle, but when you move over an ocean, and then it turns out during a pandemic, I had my first experience of purchasing a vehicle with only having seen one vehicle. Usually that old mentality of going to the lot and looking at different cars, the colors, the trims, the models, and that was all out the door. I had to land, and because I was on a 14-day quarantine, I got to shop from home online, look at all the pictures, never stepped foot onto a lot. Had the car delivered to me so I could do a test drive. Only could drive it around the block because I was restricted I wasn't supposed to leave the home. So I did all that and never set foot on the lot. And we just bought a second car this year for my son who's turning driving age. And it was the same exact experience. And I will say this, I never want to go back to the old way. I never want to go back to the lot. So, what things in the pandemic have you seen change that, are here to stay? I mean, I know I've seen things like Carvana where, you pretty much do the entire transaction without ever going to a dealership. They do everything online. So what's going to stick around?
Well, so I think I'll start by saying, first, the auto industry has historically moved slowly and is resistant to change. So I don't think anything's going to change quickly. There will always be a want for dealerships on the dealership side to continue with their proven process and sales and service techniques, and to a certain extent, the OEMs will support that. They like that. They like that process-driven style. But I think what will change forever is for there to be a path of catering to the customer who absolutely doesn't want to be there. Both of you just mentioned that. It's for many, it's a very stressful and uncomfortable situation, which they want to avoid. So that customer who will choose a vehicle online, feeling comfortable to have it delivered sight unseen after passing all electronic paperwork. Many dealers are likely to continue to retrieve and drop off vehicles, just like many of the premium brands do. And that might be a good thing for dealerships as well, who maybe want to reduce their floor space to save on expensive real estate. But the most difficult of challenges, like we've had in the past year plus, often force quicker and closer to optimal solutions. So this is a case where I think the challenge that the world, of the world has quickened the pace for the path for, dealing with those potential customers who aren't agreeable to the decades old processes. So, perhaps that space that Carvana had carved out for themselves isn't just their own anymore. But I think, OEM dealerships will get closer to that. There's probably a likelihood that there's more of a virtual car buying experience, maybe 360 views of inside and outside the products, product features, and certainly on the customer education aspect. As Dave Fish just said, vehicles are very complex now. So to expect a salesperson to know the ins and outs of 20 vehicles and all of its features is probably not the best model. So online customer education is going to be up there. So I think those are the way where it's going to change somewhat permanently. It just might still be slow.
Well, and that sort of leads into the next part. You talked about the features and some of those things. That second part is, the technology that's being rolled out, whereas that first part really is highly influenced by the local dealers who, as most people know, they're run independently of the OEMs. They work well together in some cases, but also the OEMs really are the ones responsible for, the product that gets rolled out. And, the product almost is a service in a lot of ways, because, it's not just something that, it's not a food that you buy, you eat, consume, and it's done. It's something that you're going to use over the next 3, 5, 7 years on a continuous basis. And I have had the experience of driving a car for 5 years, and as I'm trading in, they say, "Oh, did you know this little button does this?" I'm like, "Well, gee, that would have been nice to know day one." But when we look at the technology side of things and the innovations that are happening, 2 quick instant answers questions that we sent out there. We previously, Dave G and I had talked about technology, the AI controlled vehicles, 40%. Now I had a recent experience. I had a loaner car that had that auto driving. I hated it. It just felt like, I guess my control freak inside of me just took over. And I didn't even want to touch it. Every time I used it, I felt like the car would slow down at weird times and I had to do all sorts of things to make it work. So, but, people are not quite comfortable with the AI vehicle. And then, the other part is that are the customers buying on the big innovations? Before I was fielding this question about your next EV purchase and, the fact that, we still have, quite a few that are, 45% that are just not on board with it and another 40% that are iffy about it. I was doing a little research, and do either of you know when the first EV vehicle was invented?
I think it was in the 1800s, actually, or late 1800s. It was like, there's a company called Detroit Electric. I think produced a couple thousand of them, I think in the late 1800s. I'm going to go with 1904.
Dave G, you got a guess on that one?
I'll play the Price is Right strategy and say 1905.
Dave Fish won that one. Actually, the first electric vehicle was developed. It took 20 years to develop, between 1820 and 1840. It was demonstrated in 1841, and it could go a whopping 1.5 miles, or go at 1.5 miles at 4 miles per hour, towing 6 tons. And then you had to replace the entire battery set. Believe it or not, and this is sort of some of the things I see today, it was seen as such a big threat to the trains, they bought the patent and squashed it.
Sounds about right.
What are the big innovations that we should be seeing in automotive? Where are they falling behind? We mentioned Tesla before, and they really pushed the innovation envelope on things, and we're seeing more and more of those car companies come out where they're pushing the envelope. where are the big changes going to happen in the future? Dave Fish, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, in automotive, we talk about CASE or ACEs, and it's an acronym for Connected, Autonomous, Shared, and EV. And so those are the big four forces that are going to transform the automotive industry. So, are customers buying big innovations? I do wonder if you put this slide up in 1985 and you asked about online banking, you'd probably have a similar answer. And now most people do their banking on this, right? And so I think I think the industries are moving a bit faster than what some people are comfortable with. But I do think things will kind of move along. If you look at Europe, for example, most of them are planning to go completely EV. There's some Norwegian companies that are almost 100% EV now from a new car sales standpoint. So it's coming. It's just a matter of when. And so the other thing to think about too with new technologies is this conversation around car ownership. So, most people on this call probably don't own their house. They make a mortgage on it, right? But they're making payments much in the same way as you might make a payment on the car. But do you really even need to own a car, right? And so most of the dealer people I've talked to, like, oh, absolutely, everyone will always want to own a car. Maybe, not always though. You might always have one car, but maybe not. You don't need two. And so technologies like ride hailing, ride sharing, peer-to-peer, those are also up and coming. They took a bit of a hit because of COVID, right? So some skeeviness coming across because of the concerns around hygiene and so forth. But the whole premise of Lyft and Uber is autonomous driving, right? So they can get rid of all those drivers and make a lot of money. So it hasn't panned out quite yet, but they're getting there. And I think micromobility is the other thing, and looking at mobility, not just as new car sales, but as integrated into the context of urban planning. And so Toyota's like Woven City, for example, is looking at how does a city work in terms of mobility and not just cars, but micromobility and what's the optimum. So the question is really not how fast do I drive to someplace necessarily, but what's the optimum mix of mobility solutions do I need to get there? So there's really a lot of stuff going on, and it's quite exciting. It isn't in many ways what it was at the turn of the century when we were debating what standard of electricity to use. I think that's what's going on in automotive now. And we got three key players. We got OEMs who are kind of hemming and hawing. Some are stepping to it, some aren't. We have sort of legitimate players like a Tesla, maybe even a Rivian. And then we have a lot of vaporware out there. People who are just kind of sketching something out and taking orders, and who knows if they'll ever come to fruition or not. So like I said, exciting time. There's a lot going on.
And I mentioned that story about, how it can evolve quickly. I have a former client of mine at Microsoft was telling me this story about her Nissan Leaf when she bought it when it just came out. She was so excited, riveted. It was a great story to hear. Hear her talking about it, and it was like, hey, that was great. And a few weeks later, I see her again. I said, so how's the car going? There's not a lot of charging stations at the time, but she was only going back and forth to work. And she says, sheepishly, I had to trade it in. And I said, wait, what happened? And she goes, it wouldn't make it up the hill to my driveway. And I'm like, oh, that's the downside of living in Seattle. I guess the car won't make it up the hill so easily. But, a lot's changed since then. I mean, I see them here. So Dave, what do you see changing?
Well, I agree with everything that Dave Fish just said. I think that, it is an exciting time in automotive. So I'll add a couple things maybe. One is that, I think we'll see automobiles and the automotive space perhaps get a little more into moving product and not just people. During this pandemic, there, obviously a lot more people took deliveries. There were restrictions on getting out into public. And I think that, the light bulb was, the opportunity arose that maybe, like Dave said, I don't need to have a vehicle. If all the products that I need or product supplies come to me, then why do I need a second vehicle or maybe even a first? So, maybe the movement of products, and, Dave also mentioned Rivian, who I think is building a lot of delivery vehicles for Amazon right now. Maybe that's the big opportunity in the automotive space, and perhaps alleviate some of the traffic that some of us don't like to be involved in anyway. The electrical vehicle part of the equation, I think, is a little bit easier to answer, and that is every manufacturer, or almost every manufacturer, has plans to significantly add electrification to their product mix. In some applications, it might not yet be the most efficient. We do still live in a large space that is mostly rural, at least in the United States here. So, there still has to be some, trucks and vehicles to do that kind of work. But, the other opportunity here that I think the OEM see is that there's a lot of attention on infrastructure right now, and perhaps the government's willingness to take on some of that investment. So it's no surprise that we hear from the OEMs about, more of their plans about infrastructure themselves and automobile electrification, whether they be real or awaiting to see what might happen. So, I agree with Dave. Yep.
So I take it you think that we'll have more electrical charging stations before the trains make a resurgence into the country?
Well, that's a good question, because in both cases, those applications are for short travel or maybe mid-range travel. So I think there is a place for trains. There is a place for automobiles, and I don't think we're yet going to have a cross-country mode of transportation outside of airplanes, at least not soon.
Yeah, and similarly, now that I live on an island, an electric car is an easy answer for me. When I lived in Colorado, and 4 hours was a destination for me, the electric car didn't make a lot of sense because I'd have to drive halfway, recharge, and then drive the rest of the way. So we got a good question in, given, and it surrounds some of what you said. Lisa asked, given people are working from home more and Amazon will deliver anything you need to your house. I won't say anything. I found some things they won't deliver to our house, but people are reducing to just one car. And I was in the same place for quite some time until my son got his license. We still have one car among the two adults, at least. Is this a concern for the automotive industry, or about people dropping down to one car per family rather than each person having one? Do they feel this will affect their bottom line? And I'll start with, I would say in the next 6 months, they're probably not too concerned because of the chip shortage, but what are your thoughts on that? Dave Fish? You're on mute.
Yeah, so I would say freaked out probably isn't too strong of a word for OEMs. I mean, they, there is, I think in terms of who should be probably the most concerned is dealerships, because of all the things we just talked about. And you start thinking about EVs and how dealers make money, right? So they make a lot of money on maintenance. EVs don't require a whole lot of maintenance. They need tires. That's about it. You put on top of that, the dealerships are over networked. We have 16,708 dealerships in the United States for something you buy once every 3 to 5 years. Now, put that into context. There's 4,700 Walmarts in the United States. So clearly we have too many dealers. So you have that capacity there. What do you do with that? The other thing is, if people are also, EVs last longer, right? So The story you talked about where they bought the patent, that was probably a good idea. It didn't really suppress innovation, but it preserved trains for a little while longer. And so, yeah, from the OEM standpoint, they need to now figure out, okay, the revenue stream on new vehicles is going to decline. So where else can we make money? That's the big question, is where else can we make money? That's the first thing, is recurring revenue through ride share, through different innovations. The second thing to think about is the role of the OEM. So right now, whether you're buying a Chevy or a Toyota or a Tesla, yeah, that's the brand you're buying, right? That's important. Now think about the last time you took a plane ride. Do you really care if you got into an Airbus versus, a Boeing or anything else? Like, did you really care about the manufacturer of the airplane? No, you flew with Delta or American Airlines. And so that's the other situation, is if OEMs just are relegated as hardware producers for these robot taxis, like, you really care about the brand that you're going to buy. So those are some of the things that I think all the OEMs are struggling with across the world. And you've seen some of this in the form of partnerships, massive partnerships going on, consolidation amongst OEMs. So it's a time of turmoil where we'll see who comes out and innovates and reinvents themselves moving forward.
And I'll be telling you how you can get Dave's new book in just a moment here, but I like Whoa, the Future. I always think of that Doritos commercial. The guy goes in the box and, the kid's kicking it and flashing lights and he walks out, whoa, the future. An area close to my heart, and I know close to both your hearts, is, the automotive CX research and what it looks like in the future. I've seen where we take and run studies the same way that we ran them 25 years ago when I first entered the business. You do a post-transactional, you do a vehicle quality every few months afterwards. How is automotive market research going to change as a result of all this?
I could venture an opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of customer experience work is focused on post hoc, sort of after the fact. You bought a car, you got an oil change and so forth. That's good. That gets to compliance issues. That gets to what's good and bad. But that's not enough, probably. We need to know more than, I waited too long for F&I, or the part, there's trash in the parking lot, or the sales guy was rude, right? That's not enough. What we need to do is understand where are those pockets, those white spaces where we can innovate and develop new products. And we can't ask customers that. We have to look at where are those annoying things that affect millions of people every day and come up with solutions. And so I think the future of CX is building on that, is looking at where are those unmet needs, whether they're latent or manifest, and working with designers and creatives to come up with concepts, and then going out and testing those concepts and seeing what works. So sort of this, agile is the faddish word to say, but this sort of agile approach to customer experience, where we're creating new concepts, testing them either through research or through live testing with people, and doing a little bit of experimenting and continuing to sort of experiment, improve, and deploy new products and concepts. So we're not just worrying about, those hygiene factors, but we're also pursuing the what's next and what's the innovation. I think that's really what's going to make the difference between folks who pull ahead and folks who are just fast followers or compliance oriented and just tapping on problems. If you're just fixing problems and you're just striving to be frictionless, you're going to be really boring and forgettable. So I think the whole frictionless thing is admirable. People don't want to be hassled, but that's not enough. So anyway, that's my 2 bits on that.
Dave G, we do a lot of vehicle quality work, obviously, and it sort of goes hand in hand with what Dave Fish was saying, in that, it's those annoyances that come up, and sometimes they can't pinpoint the solution, but they can pinpoint the problem. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, I think the overarching idea here is that there needs to be a focus on asking the questions that are truly important to customers and using that information to its fullest. The industry is stuck on asking the same, 200 or 300 questions they've always asked, and in excruciating detail about, on the service side, amenities at the dealership. And so there tends to be this usage issue, thinking that the question and the resulting data are independent of outside influences, when the answers are almost always a reflection of the bigger picture. So, on the quality side, take an issue like, fuel economy is worse than expected, as an example. I mean, in reality, the concern rates that come out of that are more closely aligned with the cost of fuel, EPA stickers, and driving habits than the performance of the actual vehicle. And all of those things are outside the control of the manufacturer. But in the automotive space, they like process so much that they try to solve it the same way as, an actual defect on a vehicle. So, then the manufacturer uses that data to assess a team's or a worker's individual performance. But what needs to take center stage is asking the important question, or understanding why the data results say what they say, or not asking the question at all when there are outside influences that could be explored anyway. So, I think another example is the, any question or data that involves cost is always dependent upon, most importantly, the respondent's own financial situation. And there's no amount of questions that can get down to the detail of why they think the X costs so much. And in aggregate, the economy as a whole. So every cost involves all those other things. So a really good data analyst, rather than making a blanket statement or making, rationalizations or excuses, explores the possibility of all those outside influences instead. But, I'll give another example more towards the dealer and sales side. I think a vehicle purchase should be more of a matchmaking event. I've seen a lot of data over the years about respondents not understanding the vehicle that they actually purchased, didn't see that the features didn't fit their needs or their lifestyle, or was negatively surprised at the capability or incapability of a certain vehicle for whatever they wanted to do. Maybe, tow a travel trailer, an RV. Salespeople at dealerships should be in the business of selling the best fitting vehicle for the individual, not just the one with the highest kickback for themselves or the dealership. And the OEMs should understand that understand the ways that they inadvertently play into that role as well. So, and that's the kind of pressure that needs to be taken away from that negative anxiety. So, I think a simple example in my experience, when I'm in front of a salesperson with the stated intent of purchasing a sedan, but they attempt to push me into something else, or they see a credit score and try to, upgrade me or some kind, into another vehicle. That's simply not the way to go. When my two in-laws and my mother can't climb into a large SUV, it's simply a vehicle that I don't need or want at the, right now. So, I don't think that's a rare occurrence for myself nor others. So those are my two examples.
And I'm going to disagree with you both. I think the future of all research is within Dave Fish's field guide to customer experience research.
Right here, yeah.
And as promised, as we're rolling up, I think I answered all the questions that came in on the Q&A side of it. As promised, we're giving it away. If you want a copy of Dave's book, just go to this website. I'm also going to put it in the chat here right now. Go to this website, just fill out the information, and we will send you a copy of Dave's book just for joining us. And so I'll help you do that. And Dave, any last thoughts on the book that you want to throw out there?
Oh yeah, thanks for letting me plug it. Yeah, no, so kind of wrote this book with the idea that I got a lot of questions about folks who were either starting a CX program or had their overhaul an existing one. And I really felt there wasn't any just sort of recipe book that you can go out and refer to and say, okay, well, like, here's how you do it from start to end, you know? And so over the years, I've done presentations and written stuff down. So I figured, for my own labor, I would just write a book and then I could just refer to that. So that's what I've been doing. So yeah, so it's based about 25 years of experience launching multiple large scale customer experience programs for, global 50 companies. So thanks so much for letting me be here today to talk with y'all. And thanks for letting me plug my book a bit too.
And our time is up, and Crystal ended right on time. Dave, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.